All right, so what happens when you take the spicy center of a nuke, a 14-pound sphere of pure plutonium, and start poking it with a flathead screwdriver? In a post war lab, a bunch of guys with more degrees than sense decided to find out. They had a badass nickname for it as well: Tickling the Dragon's Tail. But one simple mistake, a slip of the hand, would send two of them to the great beyond in one of the most gruesome ways imaginable and force the nerds to actually write safety manuals. This is the absolute bonkers story of the Demon Core. So our story kicks off in the summer of 1945. The world is clenching its collective ass cheeks together. In the secret labs of Los Alamos, New Mexico, the geeks over at the Manhattan Project just pulled off the impossible. They split the atom and turned a lump of metal into a second sun. The bombs Little Boy and Fat Man have been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the war in the Pacific is screeching to a halt. A third bomb had been prepared, and its core was all dressed up with nowhere to go. It was a gleaming, perfectly machined sphere of plutonium gallium alloy, weighing just 14 pounds. This grapefruit-sized ball of metal, supposedly nicknamed Rufus, was a marvel of physics, engineered to be just shy of going kaboom on its own. But when Japan surrendered, the mission was completely called off. This third core became a scientific curiosity, a leftover dragon egg just collecting dust in the laboratory. In the wake of war, the vibe at Los Alamos was a weird mix of, I haven't slept in 3 years, and we're some of the smartest bitches alive. These were the guys who had tamed the atom, and with the spare core, they saw a golden opportunity to study the razor's edge of nuclear chain reaction. Their genius idea was to see exactly how much they could piss this thing off before it would go supernova. These experiments were dubbed, with a dark sense of humor that only physicists can muster, Tickling the Dragon's Tail. The name itself was a warning, famously compared to a remark by Richard Feynman, who likened the work to poking a sleeping dragon. One wrong move, you get incinerated. To get the danger here, you need to understand criticality. Think of it like this. You've got a big room full of set mousetraps, each with a ping pong ball. This room is super critical. You toss one ball in, a few go off, but the reaction fizzles out. Now start shrinking the room, packing the traps closer and closer together. The chances of one ball setting off another and another go through the roof. You get the walls just right and you hit criticality, a perfect self-sustaining chain reaction. But you push the walls just a fraction too far and you hit supercriticality. That's when the room, the building, and probably your entire family tree gets deleted in an instant burst of energy. The scientists were trying to find that exact point of criticality. They did this by surrounding the plutonium core with neutron reflectors, materials like tungsten carbide or beryllium that act like mirrors for the neutrons. These reflectors bounce escaping neutrons back into the core, pushing it closer to a critical edge. And the terrifying part in this, they were doing this by hand. So first up on the fuck around and find out portion of our program was Harry Daghlian. He was just 24 years old, a brilliant physicist who had already worked on the Trinity test. On August 21st, 1945, just days after the core's planned bombing run was canceled, Daghlian was working late and against protocol. He was working alone with only a security guard sitting at a desk about 12 feet away, probably just trying to finish his crossword puzzle. His job was to build a little house for the Demon Core out of neutron-reflecting tungsten carbide bricks. He stacked them one by one, listening to his neutron counter start to sound like a woodpecker on meth, a staccato beat of rising danger. As he went to place the final brick, the counter screamed bloody murder at him, a clear warning that this last brick would push the whole thing into supercriticality. Realizing his mistake, Daghlian pulled his hand back, but in that haste, the heavy brick slipped from his grasp. It landed with a dull thud directly on top of the plutonium sphere. Instantly, the room was filled with a silent, eerie blue glow. the telltale sign of ionized air from a massive burst of radiation. The dragon was awake and it was pissed. Daghlian reacted on instinct, knocking the brick off the assembly to stop the reaction. But the damage was done. In the split second, he had absorbed a fatal dose of radiation, estimated around 510 rem. He felt a tingling in his hand as he frantically disassembled the pile, soaking up even more radiation. The immediate aftermath was deceptively calm, but soon the poison shot into his cells began its work. He suffered from severe radiation poisoning, which one press release would later grimly call a three-dimensional sunburn. His body was cooking itself from the inside out. His hand blistered and swelled horrifically. He endured weeks of nausea and pain before finally falling into a coma. 25 days after dropping a single brick, Harry Daghlian died in a hospital bed at Los Alamos, the first person in history killed by a criticality accident. So look, a guy just cooked himself from the inside out. You'd think that might be the end of it, right? You're wrong, because before we get to the second, even crazier attempt to speedrun personal apocalypses, do me a favor, don't be like these guys and take unnecessary risks. Hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. It's the only safe way to tickle the dragon's tail. Now look, you'd think after a guy literally melted from the inside out, they might, rethink the whole let's poke the nuke core and stuff plan. And they did, kind of. The new rule was that no one should work on those experiments alone. And look, no, I'm not kidding. Their solution was the buddy system. Don't screw with the atomic bomb core by yourself. Bring a friend. You gotta have a battle buddy. So enter Louis Slotin, a 35-year-old Canadian physicist. Slotin was a brilliant, experienced, and the final boss of scientific overconfidence. He was the chief armorer of the United States, the guy who assembled the core for the very first atomic bomb test. He looked at safety manuals and the way most people look at terms and conditions. He just scrolled past them. 9 months to the day after Daghlian's incident, on May 21st, 1946, Slotin was in the lab. He was showing his replacement, Alvin Graves, how the experiment was done. Since he was about to leave Los Alamos, 7 other people were in the room watching. Slotin's version of the experiment used 2 polished 9-inch half spheres of beryllium. The idea was to put the plutonium core in the bottom half and slowly lower the top one over it like a closing lid. Official protocol, probably now written in Daghlian's memory, demanded using shims, small spacers to ensure the 2 halves could never fully close. Slotin scoffed at the shims. He had his own unapproved technique. He held the top hemisphere with his left hand, his thumb hooked through a hole on the top. In his right hand, he held a simple flat-tip screwdriver, using the blade to keep a tiny gap between the 2 beryllium shells. The safety of everyone in that room was literally balanced on the tip of a tool that you can go get at Harbor Freight for 99 cents. Now look, he had pulled this stunt nearly a dozen times before, but on this day, the screwdriver slipped. The beryllium hemisphere dropped. The gap closed for about half of a second. The plutonium core was completely encased. And again, the ghostly blue flash filled the room and the wave of heat washed over everyone. The core went supercritical, unleashing an even more intense blast of radiation than the one that had killed Daghlian. Now, Slotin knew instantly what had happened. He felt a sour taste in his mouth and a burning sensation in his hand. With a heroic flick of his wrist, he tore the top hemisphere off and threw it to the floor, stopping the reaction and likely saving the lives of 7 others by shielding them with his own body. As the others stared in horror, Slotin, the ever-cocky physicist, stood up and said calmly, "Well, that does it." He was right. He had absorbed an estimated 1,000 rem of radiation, double the dose that had killed his colleague. He was rushed to the same hospital as Daghlian and died an agonizing 9 days later in the very same hospital room. So look, after the second death, the core, once supposedly called Rufus, was finally given the name it had earned: the Demon Core. The twin tragedies, both happening on the 21st of the month, 9 months apart, finally shocked Los Alamos into action. The era of tickling the dragon's tail by hand was over. New strict safety protocols were written, this time with the force of undeniable tragedy behind them. All future experiments would be done with remote control machines with operators a quarter-mile away, separated by feet of concrete and steel, like they probably should have done from the start. The deaths of Harry Daghlian and Louis Slotin were a brutal, unforgiving lesson in scientific hubris. They proved that it doesn't matter how big your brain is, physics does not care. A slip of the hand is still a slip of the hand. The demon core itself, now too radioactive and infamous to be used in the upcoming Operation Crossroads test, was melted down in the summer of 1946. Its plutonium was recycled and scattered into the U.S. nuclear stockpile. Its demonic spirit finally exorcised. This story is a chilling reminder that when you play with the fundamental forces of the universe, the consequences of a simple mistake can be absolutely apocalyptic. The apocalypse was not speedran that day, but two men got a horrifying preview. All right, so look, if you found this story fascinating as it is terrifying, do me a favor and beat the hell out of that like button and subscribe for more tales from the sometimes tragic but always incredible history of science. Thanks for watching, and as always, cheers, guys.